All right, thank you. Today I'm going to talk about Android UI design patterns, and we have a very packed agenda. So first of all, number one, I'm going to talk about some design philosophy and consideration in Android. And then next, I'm going to dive into UI design patterns. And after that, I'm going to talk about some of the UI framework features and capability in Android. And so you guys should take advantage of. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about icons and guidelines, and finally share with you some tips on some do and don'ts in Android. So before I get started, so the first question is, why should we care about UI at all? So can anyone give it a shot? Like, why should we care about UI? Okay, so, well, so it turns out like there are many reasons why we should care about UI. So a better UI will actually improve the perceived quality of your Android application and makes your application look more polished. And because of that, it will make it your application have better ratings, and then you have probably better ranking in the Android market. And as a result, your application will have more installs, and then more purchase. Hopefully, you will make more money because of that. So next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the design philosophy in Android. So in the Android team, we believe having a clear UI design is critical in your application. So, but that doesn't mean your application has to be like very simple. For example, in the apps, like this is the desktop clock comes with any Google Experience phone. As you can see, it has actually a lot of information. It has the time in a much larger font, kind of focused. This is a clock, and also like the alarm your alarm setting, temperature, and how much your battery is currently charged. So there are tons of information, but at the same time, because of the good use of like padding and margins, and also empty spaces, you don't feel actually the application is very crowded. So that's one thing you have to pay attention when you design your application. And we also think within the Android team, we think like we always want to show the user useful information. So prefer content versus like some flashy thing, because like those things look great maybe the first few times when your user use your application, but it doesn't really add a lot of value like in the long run. So another point we want to stress is in terms of interaction. So we want to promote like interaction consistency. So what that means is you can do something interesting to engage your user in terms of like UI interaction, but at the same time, make sure you do this consistently in your application. So don't do it like one way and another way in another activity. So finally, we also believe the user experience in Android, you can further enhance that by using the cloud. So one good example is when someone tries to install your application, usually the first time they need to do some configuration, right? So some application settings, they do things like that. But at the same time, after they configure the application, if they somehow have to they get a new phone, or they have to somehow reinstall your application, they probably don't want to do that again, right? So make sure you can leverage the cloud, and you can actually use our backup service or any other cloud solution to make the user experience better. So some principles of good interface design. So we are going to cover 5 things here. So number 1, focus on your user. So know your user demographics, and also understand what they want to do with your application, and also what kind of device they are using with your application, and when and where and how they are going to use the device with your application. And the lady just mentioned before, like the user-centric approach is really very important. So put your user first. Don't try to organize things in your application based on maybe your project structure. So a lot of time users are very task-driven. Focus on those tasks and use it in your application. And then testing again, test it with real users. Don't just ask your colleague next to your desk and test your application. Try to maybe find some partner, create a trusted tester program, or have a beta, invite real user to test your application. Another thing is make the right thing visible. So what that means is like show all the most common operations in your application in the dashboard. So we're going to cover this. This is, by the way, is a Twitter application developed by Google together with Twitter, and it's going to open source very soon. And so you can actually look at all the code and look at all these like design patterns we are using in this application. So for all the secondary functionality, try to keep it in the option menu. So instead of showing it in the front page. And number 3, show pop-up feedback. So for all the interactive UI elements, try to have at least 4 states. So one is the default state, another one is disable, and have a state for when someone press on the button, and another state when the element is focused. So, and also make sure the effects of an action is clear and visible. So one of the great invention in the UI world is actually the progress bar. So some research shows like with the presence of a moving progress bar, actually the perception of the time it takes to complete the process is actually shortened. So make sure you like use this kind of like visual effects to give your user a good user experience. And be predictable. So do what the user expects. Because in Android, you can have a lot of flexibility in designing your activity stack. But use that wisely. Don't try to like remove a certain activity from the stack and surprise your user. And finally, use proper affordance. So that's actually a fancy word saying like, so if some button is clickable, just make it look clickable. So, and at the same time, like if you have a link, try to underline the link, right, and change it to a different color other than the regular text color. Don't do something unconventional. And a quote from a very famous web usability book by Steve Krug. So don't make me think. Don't make your user think when they use your application. And be fault tolerant. So only show operation that makes sense in a particular activity in your application. And limit the number of irreversible actions. So for example, like some purging functions. So if it's not necessary, don't include it in your application. And we also prefer undo to confirmation dialogues. And there is a reason for that. So when users get more familiar with your application, they tend to make fewer mistakes, right? And by using the undo feature instead of confirmation dialogues, you actually save your user a click. So and that's very important in user experience. Another quote. So if an error is possible, someone will make it. So that's another reason why you have to make your application fault tolerant. So some other design considerations. Make sure you're aware of like different ways of a device can vary. So for example, like different screen sizes, different screen density, portrait or landscape, or soft or physical keyboard. And it's also highly recommend you to read our compatibility definition document to learn about all these like UI variations. So some interesting statistics I want to share with you on screen size and density breakdown. So turns out a little more than half of the user with like Google Experience phone are using normal screen size and high density screen. And another almost 46% of the user are using normal screen and medium density screen. So it's only like a little less than 3% of users are using low density screen. So in other words, like when you design your application, so focus on the medium density and the high density, already actually cover like almost 97% of your user. So keep in mind about that. So next, I'm going to dive into the UI design patterns. So today, like software design patterns, UI design, I'm sure you guys have read the book like by the Gang of Four. So UI design pattern is very similar to software design patterns. So it's used to describe a general solution to a recurring problem. So, and these patterns actually emerge as a natural byproduct in the design process. So I'm going to give each pattern a pattern a name, and then show you an example, and then tell you what that pattern is trying to solve, what kind of problem it's trying to solve, and then share with you some of the recommendation of how to use the pattern. So these are the 5 patterns I'm going to cover today. So the first one is the dashboard. So the dashboard is trying to address the question of what can I do with this application and what's new in this application. So it serves as a quick introduction to an application and reveals all the major capability and also proactively highlight some of the new contents. So in this example with the Twitter app, you see like we are trying to show all the latest tweets at the bottom, so with the little bird there. And also we have, we're showing like some major functionality like, of course, like tweets, right? And the dashboard is actually one of the few design patterns you can take advantage of the full screen. So, and for the functionality capability, depends on the type of the application. You can organize this by features or category or accounts. So some recommendation of using the dashboard. So highlight what's new in your application and focus only 3 to 6 most important operation in your application. And be flavorful. So what that means is like, this is the place you can use the whole screen. Try to incorporate your brand in this page. Try to do something innovative and impress your user. It's very useful, important. The next pattern I'm going to talk about is the action bar. So the action bar is used to address the question of how can I do something like some common action quickly in the application. So it has have a dedicated real estate at the top of the screen, and is used to support some navigation and some frequently used operation. So it replaces the title bar, and and the best action used in this like action bar is most usually we put like the search button, the refresh button, and sometimes like in the Twitter example we put the compose message button in the Twitter bar, and it should also provide a quick link back to the dashboard. Some recommendation of that. So the action bar should help to convey a sense of place. And what that means is, in Android, it's very easy to jump from one application to another application through the use of intent. So it's very confusing sometimes to user. So with a recognizable action bar, you can help the user to give them a signal they are currently in your application. And make sure for the action bar you use it consistently within your application. So what that means is like don't have an action bar in one activity with the search button on the left and another one on the right. So don't confuse your users. So keep it like consistent. And finally, like you can put your logo in the action bar and make it like a link back to the dashboard. So provide a home mechanism. And lastly, don't use this pattern for contextual actions, because we have another pattern for that, which is the quick actions pattern.